The grand ballroom shimmered, a constellation of 1,000 crystal teardrops suspended from the ceiling, each reflecting the polished gleam of old money and older traditions. Alara stood by the marble pillar, a fixed smile on her face that felt as fragile as the champagne flute in her hand. Another charity gala, another performance. The silk of her gown, a deep emerald green, was a prison uniform disguised as luxury. She could feel the weight of her family's expectations in every whispered introduction, every approving nod from her father's associates. They saw an heiress, a well-bred asset to be merged with another suitable name. They never saw the woman whose fingers itched for charcoal dust, who dreamed in wild, violent strokes of color. Not in balanced ledgers. You look like you're planning a prison break. A warm, familiar voice murmured beside her. She turned, her smile softening into something genuine at the sight of Julian. He was her anchor, a constant in the shifting social seas. His tuxedo was impeccably tailored, but he wore it with an easy comfort she envied, his brown eyes holding a quiet steadiness that had been her solace. Since they were children building forts in the garden, is it that obvious? She sighed, letting her shoulders drop a fraction. I was just calculating the distance to the nearest exit. 12 paces to the terrace, 30 to the main hall, he said without missing a beat, a faint smile playing on his lips. But your mother is strategically positioned between you and freedom. Abort mission. She followed his gaze and saw her mother, a vision in sapphire blue, holding court near the string quartet. She's already introduced me to 3 lovely young men from excellent families tonight. Think one of them actually referred to art as a charming hobby, Philistine. Julian replied, his tone light but his eyes serious. Ignore them. The series you're working on, the one with the fractured landscapes. It's powerful, Alara. It's real. This, he gestured subtly to the opulent room. This is just noise. His words were a bomb. He was the only one who understood that the art wasn't a diversion. It was her core. He'd built the shelving for her studio, had learned about different types of canvas and primer just to talk to her about her work. His own dreams were solid, grounded in blueprints and the promise of stone and steel rising from empty plots of land. He was building a future, she felt, while she was merely decorating a gilded past. It was then that the noise of the room seemed to part. A man she didn't recognize had entered, and a subtle energy shift followed him. He wasn't following the black die script. His suit was a deep charcoal, impeccably cut, but worn with a rebellious looseness, the tie slightly askew. His dark hair was a touch too long, and his eyes, a startling shade of storm gray, scanned the room with an air of detached amusement, as if he found the whole spectacle both boring and mildly entertaining. He was talking to her father, of all people, and her father, usually so reserved, was actually laughing. Who is that? Alara asked, curiosity piqued. Julian followed her gaze, and his posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. Cassian Thorne. He runs some kind of aggressive venture fund, Ethelred Holdings, made a fortune in tech, and now he's moving into everything, from what I hear. Your father's been trying to get him to invest in the new corporate campus. He doesn't look like the others, she observed, fascinated by the man's easy confidence. The way he commanded space without seeming to try. No, Julian said, his voice flat. He doesn't, as if sensing their attention. Cassian's gaze swept across the room and landed directly on Alara. The amusement in his eyes didn't fade, but it intensified, sharpened with a spark of unmistakable interest. He excused himself from her father and began moving through the crowd with a predator's grace. His destination clear. Alara, Julian said quietly, a note of urgency in his tone. Be careful. She barely heard him. Cassian was now standing before her, and he was even more compelling up close. There was an intensity to him, a rawness that felt completely alien in this sterile environment. Alara, he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to bypass her ears and vibrate directly in her bones. He took her hand, not for a shake, but turning it over to lightly brush his lips against her knuckles. A shockingly old-fashioned, intimate gesture. Cassian Thorne, I've been admiring your work. She blinked, thrown. My work. The piece in the foyer. Witter's Requiem. He released her hand, his eyes holding hers. It's brutal and beautiful. Most of the art in these places is meant to match the furniture. Yours looks like it wants to start a fight. A genuine laugh, startled and free, escaped her. No one had ever described her art that way. They called it interesting or skilled. They never said it wanted to start a fight. It was the most seen she had felt in years. Thank you, she managed, feeling a blush creep up her neck. Castian Thorne, Julian interjected, his voice carefully neutral. He extended a hand. Julian Foster. Castian shook it, his gaze flicking to Julian with a brief, assessing look before returning to Alara. The architect. I've seen the models for the waterfront project. Very structurally sound. The faint praise was a clear dismissal. For the next 20 minutes, Castian devoted his entire attention to Alara. He spoke of art not as a market, but as a visceral experience. He talked about Berlin nightclubs where the walls were living canvases and Tokyo galleries that were exercises in controlled chaos. He spoke of passion and risk and tearing down old, useless structures. He was a living embodiment of everything her life was not, and she was utterly captivated. When he finally excused himself, handing her a simple, elegant business card with only his name and a number embossed on it, the ballroom felt dimmer, the air thinner. Alara, Julian's voice was tight. I'm telling you, be careful with that man. Why? Because he's interesting? Because he actually has a personality? She snapped, the magic of the moment shattered by his disapproval. Because he isn't one of the perfectly boring, vetted suitors you and my family would prefer. No, Julian said, his jaw clenched. Because I've met his type. They see something beautiful, and their first instinct isn't to admire it, it's to possess it. They see a wall, and their only thought is how to break it down. I saw how he looked at you. It wasn't admiration. It was calculation. You're jealous, she accused, the words tasting bitter as she said them. She'd never acknowledged the unspoken thing between them. The possibility of a future with Julian that was safe and predictable, and suddenly felt like a life sentence. The hurt in his eyes was immediate and profound. He took a small step back. Is that what you think this is? He asked quietly. I warned you not to trust him. I'm trying to protect you. I don't need your protection, Julian. I need to live my own life. For once, she turned away from him, clutching Castian's card like a key. She was tired of the cage. She didn't see the warning in Julian's eyes for what it was. She saw it as another lock. And as she walked away, she missed the sight of her oldest friend, his steady heart cracking as he watched her, full of a desperate, premonitory fear, walking directly into the gilded trap she mistook for freedom. The world became a blur of exhilarating motion, painted in the bold, intoxicating colors Castian provided. Within a week, he had taken her to an underground jazz bar where the music was so loud it felt physical. Within 2, they were on a private plane to Paris for a weekend, just because he'd read about a new exhibition at the Centre Pompidou. Alara's life, once a meticulously ordered schedule, was now a series of spontaneous adventures. Castian was a force of nature, and she was happily swept up in his storm. He found her studio, a sunlit space in her family's carriage house, and declared it to safe. He filled it with massive, raw canvases and buckets of industrial paint, encouraging her to work on a scale that terrified and thrilled her. Forget the delicate little landscapes, he'd whisper, his breath warm against her ear as he stood behind her, guiding her hand to make a savage, red slash across the pristine white. Paint what you feel. Rage, passion, lust. Let it out. And she did. Her new work was a revelation, huge, chaotic, and emotionally naked. Castian loved it. He called it her breakthrough, her sister. Sophia did not. It looks angry, Sophia said, standing in the studio one afternoon, her arms crossed as she regarded a canvas dominated by swirling blacks and deep crimson. And where are you going all the time? Mother says you've missed 2 family dinners. I've been busy, Alara said, wiping paint from her hands with a rag. Living with Castian Thorne, Sophia stated, her tone flat. Alara, I've been asking around. His reputation. It's complicated. People say he's brilliant but ruthless, that he burns through money and relationships like they're nothing. People are jealous. Alara retorted, the now familiar defensiveness rising in her throat. He's successful because he's not afraid to take risks. He sees potential where others see risk. And what potential does he see in you? Sophia asked softly, her gaze piercing. Your art or your trust fund? The question hit its mark, but Alara shook it off. You sound like Julian. Julian cares about you, Sophia insisted. We all do. This investment, it's too much, the investment. Cassian had presented it to her over candlelight a week prior. Ethelred Holdings was launching a new fund, Aurora, focused on cutting-edge sustainable technology. It was, he explained, a chance to be part of something that would change the world, not just preserve an old one. The minimum buy-in was substantial, a sum that represented the majority of her personal inheritance, the money that gave her independence from her family. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Cassian had said, his gray eyes earnest. This is how we build our own legacy, Alara, together, not living off the crumbs of our parents' achievements. The word together had sealed it. It was a promise of a shared future, a partnership built on passion and vision. When she'd told Julian, it had been their final, terrible argument. He had come to her studio, his face etched with concern. Alara, you can't. It's everything you have. You're handing him complete financial control. It's not control. It's an investment. She'd shot back, furious that he was trying to tarnish the beautiful future she was building. He's giving me a chance to be part of something real. No, he's securing his own position by using your capital. Don't you see? He's isolating you. From your family, from me. Soon you'll have no one to turn to but him. Maybe that's all I need. She'd shouted, the words echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Maybe he's the only one who truly sees me. You just want to keep me in this little box, where I'm safe and predictable and yours. The silence that followed was heavy and cold. Julian had looked at her as if he didn't know her at all. The love and worry in his eyes had been replaced by a profound, weary sadness. Okay, he had said, his voice quiet and final. You've made your choice. I hope the price is worth it. He had walked out, and a part of her life had closed behind him. She had felt a pang of terror so acute it nearly doubled her over. But she mistook it for the thrilling fear of freedom. She signed the papers for the Aurora Fund the next day, handing Cassian a check that represented her past, present, and future. He had kissed her deeply, spinning her round in the studio, surrounded by the violent, beautiful art he had inspired. She felt brave. She felt chosen. She had traded the steady, quiet love she'd always known for a dazzling, blinding light, not realizing that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows, and that some fires consume everything they touch. The first chill came subtly, like the first shift of autumn that whispers through a summer evening. It started with the phone calls. Cassian would step out of the room, his voice a low, tense murmur she wasn't meant to hear. The spontaneous trips became less frequent, replaced by long, unexplained hours at his office. When she asked about the Aurora Fund, his answers were vague, peppered with jargon about market flux and strategic repositioning that left her feeling foolish. And placed. The art he had once championed began to feel like a reproach. The massive, angry canvases stared back at her from the studio walls, their chaotic energy now feeling chaotic and desperate, not liberating. She found herself missing the subtlety of her old work, the quiet confidence she had when her only critic was herself, and her biggest supporter was Julian at a cocktail party for one of his business associates. She overheard a snippet of conversation that froze the blood in her veins. A man with a weathered face and a tired expression was speaking to a small group. Thorne. Yes, I knew him back in the day. Sharp as a tack. Left a trail of wreckage in Singapore, from what I heard. Partners who lost their shirts. Clever fellow. Always lands on his feet. Alara felt the room tilt. She made her way to Cassian's side, her hand trembling slightly on his arm. Who was that man? She asked quietly. The one talking about Singapore? Cassian's smile didn't reach his eyes. An old, bitter relic who couldn't keep up. Pay him no mind, darling. Losers always have stories about the winners. He dismissed it so easily. His charm a polished shield. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it began to sprout tendrils of cold fear. She confronted him properly later that night in his minimalist penthouse apartment. Cassian, I need to know what's happening. With the fund, with us. You've been distant, For a moment, his mask slipped. Irritation flashed across his face. "I'm under immense pressure, Alara. Building an empire isn't a picnic. I thought you understood that. I thought you were stronger than this." He walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. This constant need for reassurance. "It's not the woman I fell for." The criticism struck with the precision of a scalpel. He was right, she thought. She was being weak, needy. He was out there fighting dragons for their future, and she was questioning him. He turned and saw the doubt on her face, and his expression softened. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "It's just, the world is full of people who don't believe in us, who want to see us fail. I can't have you be one of them. Your faith is what keeps me going." He made her feel special again, chosen. The one person strong enough to stand by him. He was isolating her, just as Julian had said, but he was doing it so skillfully, making her feel that her loyalty was the most valuable currency she possessed. The final, sobering knock came from Mr. Albright, her family's lawyer for 40 years. He asked to see her alone, his kind, wrinkled face grave. "Miss Alara," he began, adjusting his spectacles, "I feel it is my duty to inform you, as the executor of your personal trust, that the investment in Ethelred's Aurora Fund was highly unconventional. The capital was not merely invested, it was used as collateral for several substantial loans. Your entire portfolio is now leveraged to the hilt." The technical terms swam in her head. "What does that mean, Mr. Albright?" In simple terms, he looked at her with profound pity. "It means, my dear, that if this Aurora Fund were to stumble, you wouldn't just lose your initial investment. You would be personally liable for the debts. You could lose everything." The world seemed to shrink to the size of the old leather chair she was sitting in. The gilded cage had not been escaped. She had merely handed the key to a different jailer. She thought of Julian's wounded eyes, Sophia's wary warnings. The thrilling whirlwind had dropped her at the edge of a cliff, and she was only now hearing the sound of the rocks shifting beneath her feet. The freedom she had so desperately sought had been a mirage, and the price for chasing it was now a terrifying, looming reality. The collapse, when it came, was not a slow crumble but a violent, sudden implosion. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Alara was in her studio, trying to find solace in the familiar scent of turpentine, when her phone began to vibrate incessantly. It was Sophia, then her mother, then a number she didn't recognize. Ignoring them, she clicked on the television, and her own face, a photo from the gala, was splashed across the financial news channel. "Catastrophic failure of the Aurora Fund," a grim-faced anchor was saying. "Regulators are calling it one of the most sophisticated Ponzi schemes of the decade. Investors have been wiped out. The founder, Cassian Thorne, is currently a person of interest and his whereabouts are unknown." The words Ponzi scheme echoed in the silent room. It felt like a physical blow. Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, the rough wooden boards cold against her skin. Unknown. He was gone. He had taken her money, her trust, her future, and vanished into thin air. The next 48 hours were a nightmare of noise and shame. Journalists camped outside the family estate. The doorbell rang constantly. Her father, his face ashen with a mixture of fury and humiliation, could barely look at her. "I warned you," was all he said, the words heavy with an "I told you so" that offered no comfort. The vultures were circling, and her family's esteemed name was the carrion dot. She was ruined. Financially, yes, Mr. Albright confirmed she was not only penniless, but deeply in debt. But more than that, she was emotionally and spiritually bankrupt. The passionate, free woman Cassian had helped her create was exposed as a fiction, a character he had written for her to play. The art in her studio now seemed like the pathetic scribbles of a deluded fool. She had lost everything, just as Julian had said she would. In the profound, hollow silence of her rock bottom, there was only one person she could think of, one person whose judgment she feared the most, but whose inherent goodness she had never doubted. With trembling fingers, she found his number, a number she had deleted in a fit of pique, but which was etched permanently on her heart. The phone rang once, twice. She was about to hang up, the shame to grate, when his voice, familiar and steady, answered. "Hello." She couldn't form words. A choked sob was all that escaped. "Alara?" His voice was immediately alert, concerned. No anger, no recrimination. Just that simple, ready concern that had always been there for her. "Alara, where are you? Are you safe, Fi?" "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, the admission tearing something loose inside her. "Tell me where you are," he said, his voice firm. "I'm coming to get you." 20 minutes later, his sensible, unassuming car pulled up a block from her house, away from the media scrum. She slipped out a side gate, a single bag in her hand, her head bowed. When she opened the passenger door and slid in, she couldn't bring herself to look at him. He didn't say anything. He just reached over, his hand covering her cold, clenched ones. His touch was not possessive, not passionate like Cashin's. It was grounding. It was safe. And in that simple, wordless gesture, the full weight of her loss came crashing down. She had lost her money, her reputation, her art, her future. But as she finally looked into Julian's kind, sorrowful eyes, she began to understand that the most devastating loss, the one that truly constituted everything, was the trust and the love she had so carelessly thrown away. Julian didn't take her to his own modern, minimalist apartment. He took her to a small, quiet cottage by a lake that belonged to his family, a place filled with the smell of old books and pine needles. He asked for no explanations, demanded no apologies. He simply made her tea, built a fire in the hearth, and gave her space to shatter. And shatter she did. For days, she moved through the cozy rooms like a ghost, the silence broken only by her ragged breaths and occasional, body-racking sobs. The weight of her folly was a physical burden, crushing her from the inside. She had been so blind, so arrogantly sure of her own judgment. She had mistaken manipulation for passion and control for freedom. Julian was just there. He worked quietly on his laptop at the kitchen table, made simple meals, and left a fresh blanket on the sofa for her when the nights grew cold. His presence was a quiet anchor in the storm of her self-loathing. After a week, she found the courage to speak. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the lake in hues of orange and purple. "He's gone," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "The news said they think he's in South America. All the money. It's just gone." Julian nodded slowly, his gaze on the water. "I know. You were right," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. "About everything. You warned me. I didn't listen. I said such terrible things to you." He turned to look at her then, his expression not triumphant, but deeply sad. "You were in love with an idea, Alara. I can't fault you for that, was I?" she asked, the question directed more at herself than him. "Or was I just in love with the idea of not being the person everyone expected me to be? I was so desperate to escape my cage that I didn't care who held the key." This was the core of her devastation. It wasn't just that Cashin had betrayed her. It was that she had betrayed herself. She had abandoned her own intuition, her art, her oldest friend, all for a glittering illusion. "What I lost," her voice broke. "It wasn't the money, Julian. It was me. I don't even know who I am anymore. The art, the passion, it was all for him. It wasn't real. That's not true," he said, his voice firm. "The talent was always yours. He just redirected it, like a river forced into a new channel. The water is still the same water." She looked at him, at the quiet certainty in his face, and felt a tiny, fragile thing begin to stir in the ruins of her heart. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was the possibility of it. Weeks turned into a month. The scandal slowly receded from the headlines. With Julian's calm support, she began the agonizing process of dealing with the financial and legal fallout. It was humiliating, but facing it felt like the first honest thing she had done in a year. One afternoon, she ventured into the small shed by the cottage and found some old art supplies, a pad of paper, some charcoal. Her hand trembled as she picked up a stick. It felt foreign, tainted. She sat for a long time, staring at the blank page. Then, tentatively, she began to draw. Not a massive, chaotic explosion, but the simple, gentle curve of the lake shore outside the window. The familiar motion soothed her. It was for no one but herself. Julian found her there later, the page filled with soft, careful sketches of the landscape. He didn't praise it. He just smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. "It's good to see you drawing again," he said simply, and in that moment, she understood the full scope of her loss. Everything was her identity, her self-trust, and the pure, steadfast love that had been waiting for her all along. The future with Julian was not a sweeping romantic epic. It was a slow, patient reconstruction. It was a friendship being painstakingly rebuilt, brick by brick, on a foundation of hard-won truth and forgiveness. As she looked from her drawing to his face, she knew their story would never be a simple one. The scars from her price would always be there. But standing there in the quiet shed, with the smell of charcoal and pine in the air, she finally believed that some things, once lost, could be found again, not as they were, but as they were always meant to be.